further, which is to ask a question as to whether any strategy that is designed to improve teaching in classrooms will ever be successful if it is made mandatory by government. Because as soon as it becomes an official strategy, the motivation behind it, the reasoning behind it disappears. People are doing it because they have to. And as soon as you're doing something in your classroom because somebody says you have to do it, you instantly lose the reason why you were doing it in the first place. I admire Dylan because he's actually read the documents, which reveals a deeper knowledge than I actually have of the strategy, which probably tells you exactly what I did when it arrived. And that is absolutely, this ties in with the points about exclusive focus. Yes, that actually in each of our schools and in each of our classrooms we need to be saying, this is what I'm working on at the moment, and I don't really care too much what it is that you are telling me I have to do. I am resilient enough and I am informed enough to say, this is what I'm going to stick with and this is the reason why I'm sticking with it. So I'm kind of going backwards a little bit and saying, not necessarily comment about that strategy in itself, but the moment it became, as I say, something that we were required to do, we hit problems. It also, Daryl, took up a huge amount of time of very capable LA advisors across the country who could have been using their expertise far better than showing PowerPoints to endless groups of people.
Well, I'm just impressed that there actually was a strategy, because as a practitioner, I don't think a year went by without somebody having something different to say about something different every time. So no sooner have we got settled with an approach to something, that somebody else has an opinion which switches the full opinion to an entirely different viewpoint. I think that the biggest issue with the last government was they were certainly better than the one before in terms of assessment for learning, but they didn't actually allow the profession to shape what the profession were doing, and they tried to impose too many ideas that they gathered from think tanks onto the general profession. And rather than letting us ride with something for a long enough period to prove whether it was or wasn't effective, they kept jumping through hoops, because that's the nature of politicians.
I think the Conservatives naturally have an inclination towards telling schools what they need to achieve, but then leaving schools to get on with it. So if you look back at the 1988 Education Reform Act, there's actually a self-denying ordinance in there that says that nothing in this act should be construed as saying that the government should tell teachers how to teach. It was telling them what to teach. So the Conservatives always believed in outcomes accountability, but Labour has also believed in process accountability. So as soon as they got in, there was that excellence in schools, and the idea that telling you that you had to set, or we make the assumption that setting should be the norm in secondary schools. So then there was the national strategies. So this assumption that they should tell you how to teach, as well as what to teach, and then blame you when it didn't work. So I think there's a very interesting time right now where the Conservatives will be reined in from their worst excesses by the Lib Dems as long as the coalition lasts. And I think they really do want to try and leave schools on their own. However, Gove's tension is beginning to show, because he wants to leave schools free, but he wants them to do modern languages. So he's got this really complicated position now where you can have this baccalaureate if you include a modern language in your 5 GCSEs. But I'm not telling schools what to do, honest. So it's going to be a very interesting time.
It's based on what Dylan was saying before lunch about how we might have an impact on the environment that our students are learning in. It's about TMGs actually. It's how do TMGs affect the way that students view their own capacity to improve? What do you think about that?
I just don't know. Every time I go to schools, I ask them, do you have target minimum grades? They all say yes. And I said, so what is it? Is it a target or is it a minimum?
Does it affect the students' view on how they can improve, on their capacity to improve?
I think that what's most helpful is not to have target minimum grades, but to talk about a range of possibilities. A friend of mine, she heard that all these secondary schools are doing this tracking of students' progress, and she got her daughter got 3 level 4s at the Key Stage 2 tests in 2007. So she asked me, what does that mean she'll get at GCSE? So I went to look at Raise Online, and I looked at all the kids who'd taken level Key Stage 2 tests in 2001, and looked at what the GCSE grades those kids had got in 2006. So I went back to the mother and I said, using a 95% confidence interval, your daughter is going to end up somewhere between G and A star. So I like the idea of talking about a range of possibilities. You know, if you do nothing, you'll end up with G's, and there's not many people like you will end up with A stars, but some will. Do you want to be one of them? So for me, it's all about opening up that range of possibilities. And the most helpful phrase I have is target equals expectation plus challenge. So the target is where, wherever you are now, we project forward where kids who are like you are typically end up, but we also talk about the range of possibilities. And so you build in a degree of challenge. And so for most children, I would want to build in at least 25% of challenge. So I would move them from the 50th percentile up to the 75th percentile. But there's some students who I'd want to challenge with a 90th percentile. And what I'd also try to do is to get the students involved in that conversation and saying, do you want me to push you to get to this level? And so getting them to sort of get involved in that conversation, and then that becomes the target. The other thing I would say is I would set targets for departments at the 75th percentile. So the maths department, I would say, so here's where your children are now. The target for the department is the 75th percentile. What I want is a target setting culture in which people set targets that are not achievable. Because if they're setting targets that are achievable, they're playing safe. You shouldn't make all your targets. If you make all your targets, then your targets weren't hard enough. And we have this risk-averse culture where people won't set targets for themselves because they're worried about not making them. Well, if you know you're going to make them, they're not really targets.
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount to derive in this area from sport and how people are prepared for goals in sport. And I'm going to make this quite personal, this response. I did my first half marathon 12 months ago. It was literally on the day of the marathon. I do run regularly, but on the day of the half marathon, I decided I'd go and run it. And did an hour and 43. I came back from that, and all the way as I was coming home, I was thinking to myself, right, what is it that I want to achieve when I next do a half marathon? Figured out that aiming for an hour 30 was going to be a real challenge. So that's what I set myself. Now, I kind of knew that I was never going to get there, but I also knew that if I set myself an hour and 30 and worked back, because I was going to spend 12 months going for it, if I worked back and looked at what would I need to do step by step to get to the point where I could achieve that, what mile speed would I need, what techniques, what training was I going to have to do to achieve it. And by the time 12 months later, I was able to return 1 hour 35. Now, I haven't reached the 130, but if I'd aimed for 135, I'd have got 140. Yes? I was always going to come in below what it was that I'd set myself as that target. And the same is true absolutely with our students. We have and I'm now going to go to Southend Boys, so from a kind of personal comment to a school comment. Within the context of Southend Boys, I have set a challenge to all staff, they all know it, that it is our goal in 2013 to get every single student in every single subject as an A or an A star. Now, they will turn around to me and they will say, that is wholly unrealistic. And I will say, yes. I do not expect in the summer of 2013 every single student to get an A or an A star. But I'll tell you something, if we don't work for it, we ain't going to get anywhere near it. So it's about setting that challenge that gives people sufficient time as well to work towards it, providing the structures and the steps to get there. And I think we should be setting our goals at the point that is unachievable. I have the target minimum grade question is an interesting one. I'm going back to the question. I cannot think of any situation in which I have been motivated by something that is below what I am actually capable of doing.
Yes.
So there's a straight answer to the question.
APP was designed as a solution to getting rid of Key Stage 3 tests. And I think in mathematics and science, APP is almost useless as a formative device. It's quite useful for summative assessment.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I oversee AFL in my school, and we use APP across the 4 core subjects, and use it because it's not compulsory to use it. We make the model work for for our school and for our assessment policy, which is very assessment for learning focused and follows your argument about the amount of summative marking that should be done by teachers and how much how much peer and self-assessment essentially you should be using. And I think you can use it in a very formative way, particularly to inform planning forward. It's very useful for English with the breakdown of the assessment criteria.
I agree.
Into assessment focuses for planning and setting some really specific targets with the children.
I agree in English. The point is that the grain size that the English teacher is interested in is very different from the grain size that the maths and science teacher is interested in. If I'm going to teach adding fractions tomorrow, I need to know that children can do equivalent fractions today. That's the prerequisite knowledge I require in order to know whether these students are ready to move on. And for the maths teacher, the grain size, and to the science teacher as well, the grain size about what you need to know about a student before you can plan effective teaching involves round about 300 to 400 pieces of information per student. Whereas, and so therefore, the formative and the summative are very much in tension. Now, in English, the statements in the APP structure, framework, are actually quite useful in thinking about what activities am I going to plan. So I think APP works in English because it fits in with the kinds of things that teachers plan to do in English activities. I don't think it works as well in science and mathematics. It works fine as a summative assessment, but most teachers would find maths and science APP outcomes not particularly useful for planning what I'm going to do with this class tomorrow. So it's important to understand, because the point is that the DCSF used to claim that it was there for formative assessment as well as summative, and I think that's true in English. I don't think it's true in maths and science.
Yeah, I want to pick up another thing. It's related to this within, once again, within the context of my own school. I was particularly interested recently in looking at how accurate our teachers were when they were doing the GCSE mock gradings. Okay? And my interest was, could I, as a head teacher, look at GCSE mock gradings and use them to get a pretty good sense of the outcome at the end of that year? How much was a typical student improving by? Where were we seeing the greatest amounts of improvement? These were the kind of questions. And something came out of this that actually shocked me, because I hadn't expected, it wasn't what I was looking for. And that was that when I looked at some of these grids, and the way that I'd constructed them was I've got mock grade against outcome grade, yes? And when I constructed them like that and I had a look at them, there were two very different types of grid that I was looking at. Some of them had pretty much a straight line going across it, which meant C grade in the mock, you're going to get a B grade in the summer, B grade in the mock, A grade in the summer, it's that kind of thing. It was very strongly predictive. Others were scattered all over the place. And then I went one step further. I said, well, hold on a moment. The subjects that are producing really good predictors in the mocks are the subjects that are scoring the best in the school. And I've got this kind of pile here, and over here I've got the departments that were not returning such good results, within the context of the school, and their prediction graph or their mock graphs were kind of scattered all over the place. And that took me kind of one step further back. And I suddenly realised what it was that I think is underpinning that, which brings us right back to some of the things Dylan was saying, is that actually I think I've got some subject departments that know what B grade work looks like, make it absolutely clear to the students what B grade work looks like, what A grade work looks like, and what you've got to do to make that change. And that's what's happening between the mock and the summer. I've got other departments who actually are revealing through this kind of scattered table the fact that they don't actually really know what high quality work looks like in their subject in a way that they're able to articulate to pupils, in a way that they're actually able to incorporate in their grading. And because they don't know that and can't articulate it, they can't tell people what it is the next step they've got to do and how they've got to change their work in the classroom and how the pupils have got to change to get to those higher grades. I think that kind of blends those two elements together.
This morning, when you were talking about learning power environments, you mentioned key features. Mm-hmm. And one of those key features were the developments of habits of mind. Mm-hmm. Now, are you, I assume it's a bit more than Art Costa?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that,
okay.
please?
Well, I think what I mean by habits of mind is disciplinary habits of mind. Yeah. So it is about this notion of when somebody gets better at mathematics, what is it that they get better at? When somebody gets better at physics, what is it that they get better at? So it's about having a clearer idea about why we think physics is useful as a discipline. And it's a very unnatural way of thinking about the world. You know, when you're in winter and, you know, we feel the cold coming in, and so our natural explanation intuitively is that cold is coming in. But if you've been trained as a physicist, you learn to think about that as a problem of heat escaping. So there are these ways of looking at the world that I think are developed in different disciplines, and I want students to get experience of all of those things at some level, which is why I actually think that we give students too much choice too early, not because they shouldn't be given choice, but because they haven't had enough experience to make an informed choice. So many students give up mathematics as soon as they can because they think it's boring. Well, it's not. It's very, very exciting and beautiful, and if you haven't understood that, then you're not making an informed choice to give that up. So I think that this idea of an informed choice also then places an onus on the school to ensure that students have the information that they need about what these disciplinary habits of mind are in order to make informed choices. So the idea of, you know, of elegance and power in mathematics, the idea of model-based reasoning in physics, the idea of chronology and provenance of documents in history. So what I'm arguing for is that we should. I'm going to get to put this to the tests shortly because I've just been asked to join Nick Gibbs' expert group on the curriculum review, and I don't know how long I'm going to last there because my ideas might get me kicked off quite quickly. But what I would like is a much smaller curriculum, where things only get onto the curriculum if they can actually get over these big ideas. So, for example, in science, I would say that equilibrium is a very powerful idea. But then you'd say, okay, well, we'll do biological equilibrium through ecosystems, we'll do chemical equilibrium, and we'll do physical equilibrium. And so we hit the same big ideas from different topics. And we design our curriculum from these big ideas into topics rather than people sort of horse trading topics. So I don't know what the minimum set is, but I'm looking for a set of about half a dozen to a dozen big ideas for each subject, and then designing the curriculum as a way of promoting these disciplinary habits of mind within each of the subjects.
So it's a bit like Paul Hurst then?
Yes, back to Paul Hurst, absolutely.
Thank you.
Much more like Paul Hurst, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I do actually think it's very important that you develop within whatever school setting you're in the ethos of questioning. Not questioning along the lines of yes, no, but actually, why the heck am I doing this? What am I going to get out of this at the end? What's the payback? Why is the teacher asking me to do this? What am I going to get out of it? And I think that's a habit of mind that sometimes teachers want to squash as early as possible. And I don't understand why.
But interestingly, if you get people to sit in a room and talk about what they really value about their subject, they often come out with that as the strongest one. I remember getting a group of historians and mathematicians in a room together, and one of them was talking about what they thought mathematical thinking was, and the historian said, "But that's what I call historical thinking." You know, it was that critical engagement with the content matter. It's actually, you know, reasoning and thinking and being, as you say, questioning, and you know, that is something that all subjects can have in common. But it plays out differently in different subjects.
And I think it comes back to teacher professionalism, allowing flexibility to work with the group of children you've got and not having a straitjacket of thou shalt teach this when, and being able to develop the big ideas, develop the way the children are learning, to take them forward. That's not necessarily ideal in a straitjacket of an examination-based world.
Darryl, can I throw a little
Yes,
rant?
sorry.
It's great when you get up here because you can just have a little rant about something.
Go for it, Rob.
Not like me at all, no. It's one thing that really annoys me is the legitimisation of opinion. You know that thing where people say, "Oh, but that's only your opinion," or "That's only his opinion." Yeah, and well, you're entitled to your opinion. And I think that this really will sound like a grumpy old man, but within youth culture, we have got a real problem with that. That you have got young people who think that when they hear two people saying things, that it doesn't matter the degree of evidence or the degree of reasoning or the basis on which something is being said. It is only an opinion. And to me, that lies right at the heart of, I don't know whether Dylan's big ideas would coincide with this, but it's actually right at the heart of the whole educational enterprise. The whole point about what we do is, I think, actually, little detour, there was a book, I think, The Art of Subversive Teaching or something like that. It goes back a long way.
Teaching is a subversive activity.
Yeah, which talked about the fact that our goal as teachers is to develop in students crap detectors. That's a rough translation. Yeah, that actually you need to, the whole point is you can tell whether something is true or false, to tell whether reasoning is sound or not sound, whether somebody's basis for an argument is reasonable or not. And actually this goes right through from our infant schools through, because what they're doing with P4C in infant schools in terms of getting pupils to give a sound reason and recognising that actually it's the sound reason that justifies somebody's statement, not the fact that they just happen to feel or think that it's a good idea. And that goes right through to emerging with your A-level further maths or whatever, where the reason that you are giving for a solution to a problem is highly sophisticated and deeply embedded in mathematics or whatever other subject you choose.
There's a very interesting book by a philosopher called Harry Frankfurt, and the title of the book really is On Bullshit. And the thesis of this book is that bullshitters are more dangerous than liars, because liars have a regard for the truth and choose to evade it, whereas bullshitters actually have no regard for the truth at all. They don't care whether what they're saying is true or not. But it's very interesting. Well, one of the slides that I didn't use today, but I often do, shows that children in state schools perform lower than children in private schools in Britain on this test by the OECD called PISA, okay? And it's the biggest gap in any developed country. It's about 90 points better in the private schools. But when you control for the social class of the kids, the gap disappears. So controlling for social class, students in private schools do no better than students in state schools, except that in the private schools the class size is 13, and in the private schools the class size is 13, in the state schools it's 25. So, the way I sum this up is to say the quality of teaching in private schools is so bad, they have to get the class size down to 13 to match what state school teachers do in the class of 25, which is slightly provocative. But what's interesting then is people say, I don't agree with that. And this comes back to your point. I'm saying, you can't disagree with it, it's a fact. You know, it is a truth about the world. You know, there's no, now you can question certain parts of the assumption, but that notion that I don't agree with that, and that has any legitimacy as a move in argument. And you see this in the media, where they actually have to, you know, when somebody presents some fact, they want somebody else on to disagree with them, because they have to have balance. Well, you know, it isn't balanced just to have two different views, where one is completely unfounded and one is actually based on rigorous evidence. And I think that what we're seeing currently is a democratization of culture, where in the past the authority was handed down, and I think that was quite bad too. But what we aren't yet doing is equipping our young people with the ability to move, to work within the shades of grey. Yes, you can prove certain things with the cold logic of mathematics, and at the other extreme you've got just pure opinion, and everybody is entitled to their own opinion. But what we need to do a better job of is mapping out the shades of grey. And somebody once summed this beautifully. He said, the fact that you can't get completely sterile operating conditions in an operating theatre does not mean you should do surgery in a sewer. The fact that you can't get all the way to perfect evidence doesn't mean that all opinions are equally good. And I think we need to help our students do a better job of mapping out those shades of grey between fact and opinion. The way that what I call formative assessment, and I still prefer formative assessment to assessment for learning, because I think assessment for learning has now been hijacked so comprehensively. The reason I think it's so powerful is because of the 5 processes I mentioned. So it's not just about teachers finding out what's going on, it's also about students taking more ownership of their own learning, it's also about more peer learning, more peer collaboration. So it's going back to the points that have been made earlier, but every minute people think, what is the best way to organise for this next step in learning? And you know, we've all had experiences, haven't we, of teaching students something by getting them to do a group work discussion. And you know, sometimes you've done it so well that these groups are having great discussions and you're not doing anything. So you're feeling a touch guilty and a trifle bored, so you go over and disrupt a group of students because you feel bad. And as long as teachers feel that, we still won't have got there, because the important thing is that teaching is about not what the teacher is putting into the process, but what the learner is getting out of it. And so, for me, formative assessment is just focusing on what did the students learn as a result of what I've just done. And that's why, to me, that question will never be stale. That'll always be the most important thing in teaching. The problem we have in English is we have two words, teaching and learning. And so, I mean, in Swedish, in my mother tongue, Welsh, in Maori, they have the same word for both things, which actually is quite interesting. You know, because in this country we have this notion between quality of teaching and quality of learning. Remember, Ofsted used to give separate grades for that, and I never really understood that. You know, what sense do you make of a lesson where the quality of teaching was good but the quality of learning was poor? It sounds like the surgeon claiming the operation was a complete success, but unfortunately the patient died. So, for me, it's always been not about what the teacher is putting into the process, but what the learner is getting out of it.